Hey everybody, I'm Asian Funk. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm joined by a super special guest. He is a world famous songwriter and music composer, credited with creating the theme songs for X-Men the Animated Series, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Dragon Ball Z, and many, many more. Mr. Ron Wasserman, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, how you doing?
You get more like Power Ranger fans or X-Men fans coming up to you?
Oh, Power Rangers are 500 to 1.
Really?
People will come up and talk about X-Men, but X-Men just never, for whatever reason, I guess it's because Power Rangers went so longer and still goes. If X-Men was still going, then it would be different.
Right. Yeah, I guess, well, it's funny because I didn't realize just how many versions and iterations of the Power. I mean, I was aware that Power Rangers was still on, but I didn't realize it's like there's like In Space, Neo, Ninja, like there's so many versions.
Just the first 3 or 4 years, and then back for SPD on with Disney in 2005. Other than that, it was other people rushed in to take over the show after I left Saban at the end of '95. I still worked for them.
Right.
I just left to go pursue other stuff as well.
Okay. Do you find it harder to write a song with words and lyrics or without?
Well, certainly it depends. Sometimes it makes it a lot easier because you can come up with the groove and then a melody, and the lyrics always seem to come. I mean, especially in stuff geared for television, because it's so specific, and depending on the demographic, you're going for a certain age group. So that does make it easier. But it's a lot more fun over the past several years as themes are being phased out, when they'll say, we need a 12-second big band theme. You know, no vocals, just get in there and get it over with in 12 seconds. And then down to 9 seconds, 7 seconds, sometimes 5 seconds, which that is a bit of a challenge to come up with something, because they want something that's really hooky, and they'll send you a hit song. They'll go, I want it to hit me like this. I'm like, I have 5 seconds.
Yeah. It takes 5 seconds to warm up to get to a certain part of a song, like at least minimum, right? Like
that's not even a drum fill.
Right. Yeah. So sometimes 5 seconds, there's nothing. You don't hear anything. So yeah,
there's nothing. Netflix is the only one that is still keeping the long themes. And of course, everybody just skips it. You know, the little button comes up. And so that poor guy, I mean, I've watched complete series. I've never heard the theme. Skip. Wow. Well, sometimes I'll give it a few seconds to get into it. I will think, well, their score may be great, but the theme is, you could tell they got a lot of notes, and at one point just went, okay, whatever you want, let's just get it over with. It's so watered down, so it's just okay to skip it. I feel guilty, but I don't feel too guilty.
Sure. How often are you given complete creative freedom when you're working on a theme? Has that, I mean, I'm assuming that's happened a few times at least.
Well, usually they set a few guidelines and say, we'd like something that's modern sounding, or something, like I said, big band or something orchestral. And they'll just usually say, we have 3 or 4 people out there submitting. So do whatever you think is right and submit it. And then if they pick it, then they start giving notes and knocking it back into this little corner. That's what goes on now. But then there's times where I submit it and they go, great, we love it. Send the split tracks, it's done.
Wow. And how
that's
often?
Pretty rare.
Okay, I was going to say, how often does that happen?
1 out of 10 times, maybe. The other 9, there'll be 5 with some notes, and then there's going to be 3 where it almost ends up being completely different than when you started. And that's not uncommon for anybody in this business.
Was there a piece of feedback or an edit that you pushed back on and said no to? I mean, you don't have to give me the exact title you're working on, but
there have been a couple times where I just said, we've been going up and back for weeks on this, and do you really think this is necessary? This one thing, something minor. And sometimes they'll go, you know what, you're right. it's just like they have time while they're producing the show. And some of them are writing the scripts and then they're sitting with the editors. And I think it just occurs to them, I haven't messed with the composer today. So they listen through and they have an idea, something that's hit them. And it's right up to the last minute. And the best part is when they say we're mixing the first show. And then later that day when they say, yeah, we mixed the first show, because then it's done. You can't really change it, shouldn't change it after that. A show like Dragonball Z, things like that. Sometimes I'd write up to 25 themes.
Oh, wow.
I just bang out one a day. Ironically, with him, we always went back to the very first one. So that was a pain in the butt, but it was airing on CBS, so I was fine with it.
Yeah, yeah. So since you brought up Dragon Ball Z, how did you even get involved with that? Like, did you like have audition? Did they reach out to you? How did that even start?
Saban had been given the show. I don't know what their involvement fully was, to do the music for it, not the theme, but to do the music. I had already left the company, but was working for them part-time at home while working on other projects. So they called and they said, we have this thing called Dragon Ball Z, and frankly, we don't care at all about it. Just do whatever you want to and score it at home. So I sat at home, and I remember I had my Mac computer, one keyboard. Everything was done through this digital MIDI, but I did mixes. And they would send me a VHS tape, and one side had SMPTE time code to lock to the computer so I could lock to picture, and the other side had the audio. So while I'm listening to the audio, I also hear this of the SMPTE time code bleeding through the other track. And that's how I scored it, hitting stop, rewind, and play on a VHS machine, and then watching it on my tube television and scoring it while watching it. And that's why there's these huge, lush, drone-like things, but these huge builds. It would have been almost impossible to just hit something, the picture, with that setup. Because to have the proper setup would have been back then, and lock to picture would have been a minimum of $30,000-$40,000.
Right. Like you'd be, or in like, you'd be in a studio or something where,
Right.
Yeah.
Like when it was at Saban, it was a full-blown studio, and we did everything to tape. Then digital came in. It was two-inch tape machines and a system called links. So you'd have to pre-roll. If I was scoring, let's say something for X-Men, have to pre-roll 30 seconds. You hit play and you sit back and you just wait for all the machines in the video to lock, and then you get a green light, and then you can start scoring. You make a mistake, go back, record over it. It was painfully slow.
Oh man. And so how long, like from start to finish with this take, like this process take?
Well, I got really fast at it, but usually, especially when you're starting, the first 10 or 15 episodes is when they start building the library of cues that they can bring in later. But those first 10 or 15 episodes are usually the most difficult, especially when they come in, they say, I'll replace this 30-second bit in the middle. So you've got to find the tempo, find the key, figure out what key you're going to come out in, and build it in that space seamlessly so it sounds the same as what's on either side of it.
Do you ever think that like most people will never ever hear it the way you hear it?
Never. Yeah, nobody will ever hear the original, the themes for X-Men or Power Rangers or any of them. Nobody will actually hear those in the big room on the big speakers, which are mounted up higher, just cranked, coming straight from the tape through the console. It sounds completely different than by the time it gets to television, where it's squashed and everything else.
Like with X-Men, they add sound effects, right, on top of the music. Were you when you first heard the X-Men theme on TV, what were you thinking?
Ugh, why did they put all those sounds over everything? And that's the same with every theme for any kids show. I don't want to call it kids show, but kids show. You deliver it, you work so hard on the mix, and then as soon as it starts, you shoo, boom, and you're just why bother? Why were we so picky? It could have been so much easier.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it worked well. It's fun to watch them cut the picture to the music. That's always nice. Because all those shows at Saban, the theme was always written first. Then they cut to it.
Interesting. So were you given, so like with X-Men, were you given anything when did you come in? Like, do you know how far into the production of the show it was by the time you were brought in?
We're making a presentation. We need a theme. That's what it came down to. I don't think I saw a thing. And I wasn't a comic book or sci-fi guy. So I remember going to my sound effects friend there, who's a huge sci-fi guy. And I said, tell me, not that it really affected the theme, but I said, tell me, what do these guys do?
Wow.
I knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. Plus, we were cranking out stuff on all levels at such a rate that it was just a factory. I mean, there were so many shows and so much music and so many projects always going on that it was just another day. We need a theme for this thing called X-Men. And then later on, we need some music for it, which may have been done the picture. I don't really remember. On Power Rangers, I definitely remember scoring the picture, but that was almost a year later.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because you did X-Men first then, right?
Yeah, which I had wrong forever. I thought it was Power Rangers, then X-Men. I got them backwards.
I thought the same. I had to double check that. And I was like, oh, he worked on X-Men first.
Yeah. So that was, I always thought Power Rangers was the first theme that I ever worked on, but it turns out it was X-Men. So that's the amount of work I was doing. I even forgot what year those things were written.
Well, I didn't realize until before talking to you how closely you created both of those. And I was just like, is that right? Like, did he just make both of those like within a year almost? Like,
yeah, it was fast and furious scoring. And then when Power Rangers came in, there was, first I had to score the complete episodes, and it had to be done fast, especially because the show exploded within 2 weeks of airing. So they were just cranking those things out. And then it got down to, once I built a good music library, I had to score about 9 minutes of each episode, and I could do that in one evening. And then also start working on a song for the series. And maybe if they had a commercial, or they needed a favor, or if they said, hey, we have another show. Because they did, I don't remember them, but they brought in probably 8 or 10 other series that they were trying to sell that never made it. But I thought it was a great show when I first saw it. And I'd go sit with my friend while he was doing sound effects and just watch what he did. Because the show is so intense sound effects wise. And he would just have that same link system, and he would just back up, and then he'd get it to play. And then as soon as he was able to record, you hit record, he had a keyboard, and he would hit the sound effect he wants, and he would say, good, that one's done. He'd move on to the next one, next explosion, all triggered by one actual piano keyboard.
Huh.
So it's a slow process then.
Right. So yeah, like I guess the difference between the Power Rangers theme and the X-Men theme is one has the title spoken in it, like there's words, and the other doesn't. Are you, when you're creating these themes, do they tell you we want the title of the show in the music, or is that something you come up?
They may have on. It's possible on X-Men they may have said, just see what happens. On Power Rangers, they definitely wanted vocals. On X-Men, also, I mean, singing X-Men, I can't really think of a rock way. I mean, like, Go Power Rangers, not that I wrote Spider-Man, but Spider-Man. I mean, they lend themselves, but X-Men.
Correct.
It's just kind of
not enough syllables.
Yeah, there's no melody that really comes to you, and it's kind of a funny phrase to sing.
Yeah. Right.
It was better to stay instrumental.
Yeah, I see. So really, it was more because the title was hard to say, and so you're like, let's just not say it.
Yeah, and that was rare because usually they want you to tell the whole story. Yeah, back then, because they wanted to have a 1 minute theme that everybody got into, or 30 seconds that got the kids all excited to watch the show. But then they found out as there were more channels that people were switching. They got bored with the same theme, so they cut it from 60 to 30, and like I said, 15, 7, 5. And now I hear commercials where they just have a little sound like doo-doo. That's
Right.
their product.
Yeah.
So I get it. It's a shame, but it's becoming a lost art form.
What's the equivalent of a writer's block for a musician? Like, what do you do when you hit that? Like, do you usually like just step away and go for a walk, or do you have to like do something completely different?
I used to literally just walk around the room in a circle and kind of sentence myself to that until an idea would come. And that happened on a lot when I was doing a lot of commercials. I just remember going in the backyard and just walking around sometimes for hours. And then all of a sudden the idea would come. I'd have a recorder, or the phone recorder was faster. And when it came, I would just sing it in. And I'd go, and then now I can go back in the studio. It's kind of like walking around waiting to receive the signal. And then
I see.
it just hits me. And then there's other times where, right, and I've had this with several producers, where the idea hits me as soon as they're telling me. I had that once. I had to write a big gospel piece for a show with Cedric the Entertainer. And they were setting up the scene for me. And I said, it's in my head. And I just hung up on them and recorded the idea real quick. Maybe took 45 seconds. And then called them back and said, I've got it. Now I just have to work it out. Sorry about that. And luckily they loved it. So I looked like some sort of...
yeah, like savant or something. You're like a savant. Genius. That's crazy. So you never know, like when... What you're saying is you never know when it's going to come to you. That's
never. And then there's times where the worst thing is no deadline. Like, oh, get to it when you can. Because that never works out well. Never. So sometimes I'll try and psych myself into thinking there's an actual deadline. I'll do that every once in a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I did with a video game I've been working on that will come out October next year.
Oh, wow.
And 2 years ago was when I was really working intensely on it all the time, because they didn't know what the deadline would be. So I just pretended it was going to be a very tight schedule.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Now that I know it's next October, and I said, I know I still have to do quite a bit of stuff. And they said, yeah, but we don't really need it till September of next year. I'm like, don't say that.
Yeah, right. Because
you need it by December of this year.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, that's the problem, right? When someone doesn't give you enough direction, then you're kind of like, I can think of anything. But then you give them something, they're like, oh, we actually don't like this. And like, why didn't you just tell me that?
That happens all the time.
Really?
You just deliver. I'll usually, if they don't know, which goes back to your earlier question, I'll deliver 3 themes. One in the style they asked for, one that I want, and one that that is just not wrong, but just a wild card. And it's absolutely even what they pick. Sometimes it's what I wanted, sometimes it's what they wanted, and sometimes it's the wild card.
Huh.
Or sometimes the wild card sets them into a new thinking process. Yeah. They're like, you like this, but it's not right, so do more like this. So now that gets moved up to what they want. Then I do what I want, then another wild card. And sometimes then it moves back. It becomes a terrible circle.
Yeah, I can see that. Have you ever done one where like you know, or you feel like they're going to pick the first version and you give them a really crappy version because you want them to pick the version you want, but they end up picking the crappy one and you're like, no, why did I do that? Has that happened?
Yeah. And then, yeah, that's happened a few times, to the point of where I said, do you mind if I use an alias or a fake name on the credit? Because I really don't like this. It's been
Really?
Small stuff.
Yeah.
They're
Wow.
like, no, that's fine. I'm like, yeah, I just, I'm thinking about using this new name. I can't say because
Sure.
so it would be an embarrassment in a way.
Yeah.
And that's generally also when, it's obvious, at least to me, that the whole show is just going to be a complete disaster.
Hmm.
It's just not happening at all, but it's work. So
Yeah.
learn from every gig.
Right.
So
That's
that happens.
interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a signature thing that you do in most of the themes that you make? Is there something that you do in all of them to like for either for yourself or just as like a like a signature type of
No,
thing?
actually, there isn't. And
Really?
I wish I had that thing like David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. Every single solo goes, every single thing he's ever played, every song has that.
That's funny.
But there is no absolute signature. If there's stuff that is consistent in a few of the themes, it's strictly a coincidence.
Interesting. Okay, I
There's
was
nothing
wondering
done
because
intentionally.
yeah. Well, good. Even just looking at your credits, it sounds like you do so many different things like that aren't even they're not related. Like it's live action, it's animation, it's a TV show, or it's like a fan made thing. Like there's no even in the work that you choose to do,
Right.
there's no constant. So that's why I was wondering if there was
Yeah, it's diverse, and I have no template set up, not a one. I mean, I do once the show has its sound,
sure.
but when any project starts, I load up Live or Logic, but I load that up without a single sound and just start from the very first sound or the groove, experimenting with something new. Where other people will say, oh, I'm going to pull up my orchestral template where I have all the sounds already loaded and ready to go. I never like to do that. I
Hmm.
like to pretend every time that it's my first time. So far, it served me well. So it's a pain in the ass, but it works well.
Yeah, I mean, there you must be doing something right because, well, one, you're still working,
Right.
and two, people like me still say like, oh, I'm a huge fan of this thing you did almost like 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, it's longer
Um,
than that. I mean, I think we're going to be coming up on
wait,
we're
90,
going to be coming up on 30 years in 2022 for X-Men.
is that right?
Yeah, be 30 years. You think it's weird.
Jeez, I'm only a few years older than that show. That's
Yeah, it's a trip.
yeah. Is that weird for you?
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those markers in time, like like having like my son who's 16. It's weird. It really puts it in cement how long it's been and that you're aging. When you look back, I mean, I've been my first paying gig was just a bit thing on a I don't even remember NBC show when I joined ASCAP, who collect royalties. There's ASCAP, BMI.
Uh-huh.
I joined them in 1987. I mean, I've been with them 33 years.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me.
Well, is it crazy that a lot of people, most of your fans, don't even know anything that you've worked on before X-Men? Like, is that
Oh
because
yeah. Well, there wasn't anything very
even though you've been working probably what for a decade
Oh
before
yeah,
that?
it started in the. I mean, I wasn't making any money at this in the '80s, but I mean, I was in bands from about, I guess, from about 1981 on. But I started writing. I mean, I started playing when I was 3 and had my first little published work in a finger exercise book at 5.5. So I mean, it's just all I've ever done,
Yeah.
which is good because if I had to rely on being educated well and having a profession that way, I would, I, I'd be, I'd be just digging ditches. That would be my whole life.
That's that's crazy. Do you you've done music for some fan made movies
Yes.
and like what's do you feel well one how do you feel when fans come up to you and say do you want to make music for this thing?
Well, I love it. It's just most of the time they've come up with a concept and they want a theme. And I said, well, that's way early. So once you have to be much further into your project before you should even have a theme. You should, at the very least, have a script and a plan for when you're shooting or how you're shooting, even if you're shooting with next to no budget. Just some sort of a plan before you get to the music part of it, because there's no sense in having a theme song for a one-page synopsis of what the show is that you're hoping to be, because it's going to change drastically. Whatever you have in your head, it'll change as it evolves. So a lot of times I tell them that and they're like, okay, cool. And frankly, I never hear back from them because it never gets
that far.
Yeah. A lot of people think when they have an idea, and I'm not dissing anybody, or an idea for a song, they go like, well, I have this this concept, and they don't realize so do a million other people. It's taking it through that long, horrible stage to get it to where you actually shoot something. And then stuff that's actually shot, well, that's very different. I'm more than happy to do some of them. And then some people will send me something they shot on an iPhone. Their dad held it while they're doing their moves, or there's a fight in a park, with background noise and everything else. And are you interested in scoring this? And I'm like, no, just find something online.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. Because there are a lot of free, like 30-second music clips of different themes. So at that point,
there's a million things that are pre-existing. And so I'm interested in it if there's something unique about it. And of course, if they're shooting something like that Lord Zed thing I did a couple years ago.
Yeah.
That really looked like it was going to be shattered. What was it? Shattered Grid?
Shattered Grid, yeah.
It looked like it was almost going to get picked up by Hasbro. I mean, they were talking to Hasbro seriously about making that a series. And then it just disappeared.
I for a second, I was like, did they make this? Like, because, from any of the research, it seemed like they were calling it's a movie. And I'm like, oh, where is it? But
it just
can't find it.
It just went away.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those things that just go away. And that's because the excitement of even writing the short script and getting the actors and however they got, I mean, they did a great job.
Yeah. Well, that's why I thought it was legit. Because they had actors from the show, from the original show. And then they had you. And I was like, okay.
And they're pulling resources. They were able to get, the masters were all destroyed for everything Saban ever did, either by Disney losing them or Saban lost them. I mean, they're gone. So they wanted to pull up footage from the original Power Rangers, but they didn't have the dialogue isolated. So they had to have somebody go into a spectral analysis and erase the music and the sound as best they could around
between the
words, the actors.
I
recently lost a theme for a show, and this is so they said they love yours and they love one other guy's, but they're leaning towards yours. And then a week later, my friend called and said, well, they decided to go with the other one. I said, well, that's fine. This is not a big deal. As it turns out, no one was really sure which one they liked. And it turns out they kind of accidentally went with the other one, because the network, the post-production house sent
both of them
a cut with the other guy's theme in that everybody had picked. And then the show creators came back and said, that's not the theme we picked. And so I said, do you want us to switch it to the other one? And they said, what'll it cost? And they said, I don't know what they said, $5,000. And they said, oh, screw it, just keep that. So they went with the theme they didn't want. So obviously I would have had it.
Yeah, well, that's annoying.
It's by committee now.
Have you ever created a theme for a YouTube channel before? Like, I'm assuming that's a no.
I don't think so.
Really? Okay. So question. If a YouTuber were to approach you to create a theme for his channel, let's just say he's into comic books and interviewing pop culture figures, what kinds of questions would you need to ask me, or what things would you need to know before you would even start to come up with something? Because like you said, with fan-made films, you want to make sure they have a script, you want to make sure they've shot a few things and thought things through a little bit. What
Well,
other
with you, for example, you're doing episodes, so that would be the thing. Again, better to go with probably instrumental and just get a feel for. So do you want like cool modern hip hop, or do you want something that's a little bit rock? You know, what style are you looking for? That's really the one question. From that point on, it should be fairly easy to do.
Where can people find your work online?
You can go to ronw.com, ronw.com, and the video game I'm working on, which I think he's changing the title of, is The Nothing, or just look up Play Nothing, or just you can find it on Facebook. It's going to be a huge RPG game, takes place in LA, and pretty amazing stuff.
It's been a pleasure to have you, Ron. I hope to have you again soon. And yeah, feel free to, whenever you want to do something on YouTube, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.